Good afternoon and welcome to the Indigenous Youth Media Workshop screening. I'm AISLYNN Arnold.
And I'm Renelle Velarde. Thanks for tuning in. This week we worked with NAZ Today and Northern Arizona University to put together a series of stories. Stories that will tell both local and Indigenous perspectives. Here is Akatli Silva with more on the importance of cancer resource accessibility.
Cancer and diabetes have long plagued Indigenous communities, and evidence suggests there is a key player at fault. Cause of death among Indigenous people in the United States. Many scientists believe the uranium and arsenic found in our natural food and water sources could be linked to cancer.
There's almost a factor of 2 larger number of kidney cancer cases on Navajo compared to the majority population. So we hypothesize that it is an issue with respect to environmental exposures.
Since the 1940s, companies have been mining uranium on native lands. Although production stopped in the late 80s, the effects still linger.
If you have all these open mines and they're not being cleaned up and you get sort of long-term contamination of water supply or food supply, then, people are drinking that water for, long-term. Your livestock is drinking that water.
Despite health professionals recognizing uranium and arsenic as carcinogens, the amount of resources available to our people are slim.
We recognize here in the state for Native communities, there's very little funding that goes into cancer prevention, meaning screening, or goes into even cancer diagnosis and treatment, where communities see the disparities, where they see the gaps.
And one of these gaps, the overgeneralization of Native health disparities.
Why it's really important, I think, for groups to go in and look at these individual tribes and not just to say, well, on Navajo it's this, so every tribe in the country has these issues.
The Center for Native American Cancer Health Equity, or CNACH, is funded by the American Cancer Society and works to close the gap between Native health disparities.
We've been very effective in making sure that everything we do includes a focus on traditional medicine as well as non-traditional medicine, which is oftentimes called Western medicine.
CNACH is putting research into tracking cancer data that proves, historically, that Natives are dying earlier than other Americans.
Cancer mortality. So once people are diagnosed, how long do they survive? Which is a really good indicator of the access to treatment and stuff. And historically, there's been a lot of disparity where people from Indigenous backgrounds were often diagnosed in far later stages than other people. We're looking at screening rates over time, and we're looking at what stage people are diagnosed. So those are sort of the 4 main things we're looking at: incidence, mortality, staging, and screening.
The point of CNACH's work is to bring the community together.
Listening to people's stories, sharing people's stories, really hearing what they are going through, because it's that human emotion, that connection, that 2 people are experiencing a similar event, so that makes you more committed to a cause.
Jennifer Hudson, Community Program Coordinator, uses her personal experience to drive her work.
With my grandmother, and when she was diagnosed, we had no idea what lung cancer was, what it encompassed, and she wasn't a smoker, she wasn't a drinker, so it was like, how did this even come to be?
There are over 20 Native tribes in the state of Arizona alone, all of whom have different needs that are not being met by healthcare professionals. But there are research efforts working towards more easily accessible resources. Akatli Silva.
And Zayatian Benali. And
Taylor Bigay.
And
Indigenous Youth Media Workshop.
A local group of students are working to change the name of the well-known Agassiz Peak. Cadence Lewis is here with the story.
The Owowakie Peak is sacred to the indigenous people native of this land, and many natives across northern Arizona hold this peak in great regard.
Machias Marks and Michaela So are 2 of the many former students of Flagstaff High School who are taking the steps to federally change the name of Agassiz Peak to Omaki.
And that is why we came up with the name Omaki. It's a Hopi name. It translates to House of the Clouds. With that name, we see it as it brings all these clouds together. You see it ecologically if you observe it, but you also see how it's brought all of these peoples from all walks of life together here.
It doesn't represent what all the 13 tribes consider it to be, so that it started from that. And then we moved into whether it was just groups. I know in Flag High there are a lot of students who come far away from home, and when they're missing their family or they're going through a hard time with school or something, that's who they pray to.
Agassiz Peak got its name after being named by General William Jackson Palmer during the Pacific Railroad survey with John Louis Rudolph Agassiz, who was a Swiss-born American biologist, geologist, and eugenicist.
And a eugenicist is a scientist who's devoted to advocating for the sciences that approve and praise the oppression and dehumanization of peoples of color.
Name changes across the country have been actively opposed, such as Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. However, Mount McKinley's name was changed to Denali, a native word meaning the Great One, as well as 660 sites being changed due to derogatory terminology. An elementary school in Chicago was changed from Agassiz to Harriet Tubman, with support from his great-great-grandchildren.
We had talked to the descendants of Agassiz, and they were also very supportive as to why they wanted to change the name, because their beliefs aren't what was brought from him.
The National Geographic Board of the U.S., the Diversity Council, City of Flagstaff, the City Council, the Human Rights Commission, the Indigenous Commission, the National Forest Service, and letters from the Navajo Nation are all in favor to help achieve the name change.
What we're offering is that you sign this petition and be a part of spreading the awareness and helping with the outreach. I'm home, and I know why it's home to me. I know that it's home to all of these people, and to even this day, people from all around the world, when they come here, the way they identify this place is by this mountain. They call it home. They picked up their roots and planted them here.
The mountain is a sacred part of many indigenous cultures in the area. With the work of Machias and Michela, they hope to change the name to something with more history within the region. Flagstaff might soon be able to say they are one of the hundreds of sites being changed from derogatory and hurtful names to ones with meaning and history.
Natural Resource Guide Colleen Cooley stopped by to speak with our workshop to talk about her work as a mentor in the program. Here's CARNELL Manson with the story.
The Canyon Landsfield Institute-sponsored Native Teen Guide and Training Program was helped develop skills for Native youth to learn about guiding and natural resource career opportunities.
Colleen Cooley, a Diné woman from Shanto, Arizona, had just returned from a river trip down the St. Juan River, where she mentored Native youth to learn about many skills that go into being a river guide.
A lot of these youth that came on the trip live in the cities. They live in Flagstaff, Phoenix, Salt Lake. So they're coming from the bigger cities, and then they go into an environment where you're surrounded by animals, you're surrounded by the water, you're surrounded by the plants, even the heat of the sun, or even mosquitoes. We faced a number of mosquitoes on the trip. So I think just immersing them into the landscape is a good way to learn about land conservation.
The program seeks to nurture healthy development through experience like whitewater rafting and visiting cultural heritage sites, learning camping skills, and creating a sense of community among the Native teens, as well as learning about leadership and team building.
We have discussions around water rights. They do journaling, reflections throughout. By the end of the day, they get to basically learn what it means to be a river guide as well. So setting up the camp, taking things on and off the boat, learning about the history of the area.
The curriculum mainly emphasizes Native-based cultural knowledge and history to enhance physical and mental health and social emotional learning.
I get to see the transformation from day one to the last day of the youth, and how much they open up and how much they go from being uncomfortable in the space. Maybe they never camped or been on a boat, and then they want to stay in that environment because they're away from their devices or they're trying something new. And so they feel, I think I see they feel more empowered or inspired by the end of the trip.
From the professional field to the traditional way of life, Colleen Cooley has shown that land conservation benefits all.
I think it's already part of who we are to take care of the land, and that in return it can take care of us. So I think that's our mindset as Indigenous people, but the Western perspective is different. It's about, oh, how can we address this, or how can we help these people that live in these communities? But it's actually the other way around. We're actually teaching people in academia or in nonprofits the way we've always lived and continue to live with the land and the water.
The emphasis on cultural place-based learning stems from the relationship Indigenous people historically have to the region.
I think as Indigenous people, we have a different connection to the lands and the waters that we live on or that sustains us compared to non-Indigenous people.
For the Indigenous Youth Media Workshop, I'm CARNELL MANSON.
The power of storytelling is something that often goes unrecognized. Xavier Fisher is here with more on their story about an Indigenous filmmaker.
IVEY-CAMILLE Mini Beats So is an Indigenous filmmaker native to Arizona. Our team worked to paint the picture of why having Indigenous people telling Indigenous stories is so important.
Filmmaking is a great way to expose important issues and discussions to the community and the world. We talked with IVEY-CAMILLE Mini Beats So about her experiences as an Indigenous filmmaker.
IVEY-CAMILLE Mini Beats So Yinshe. I am the director of Powerlands. I started making films at 9 years old with an organization that started here in town called Out of Your Backpack Media. My first piece that I ever worked on happened when I was 9 years old, but my first piece that was all mine was In the Footsteps of Yellow Men. Started that at 11 and finished that by 13.
Her most recent film, Powerlands, highlights the struggles that the Indigenous people suffer at the hands of a greedy corporation.
So the film Powerlands is about the effects that energy corporations have on Indigenous people on a global scale. So we're looking into 5 different communities: Standing Rock, Colombia, Black Mesa, the Philippines, and Oaxaca. 5 different types of energy, from uranium, copper, oil, coal, and wind, all the way to 5 different forms of resistance, from peaceful protests to armed militias.
Personal experiences as well as connections to people with similar concerns allowed this project to take place.
I am from Black Mesa. That's my community, and that's my home. That's where I spend all my time. That's where my Nelly, helped to raise me. And when the producers of Powerlands, Ava Joswitz and Jordan Flaherty, had come back from shooting in Colombia and looking into the Cerrejón mine in La Guajira, we sat there and talked for 2 hours about the similarities and differences between Colombia and Black Mesa. We found that there were so many similarities: food, the clothing, the culture, even the same corporation was affecting both areas. And that's really where the film started. Eventually we landed with accountability for ourselves as filmmakers, and then and for the communities, as well as following the emotional journey that comes with it.
Aside from showing the struggles many Indigenous people go through with these corporations, the film is also a reminder that everyone is important and valued.
You're not alone. If you are in this struggle for sustainability, for land back, for all of these things, you're not alone. We are all here together. And so that's and what is the community building that can be done?
Filmmakers like IVEY-CAMILLE are helping to fill the demand for Indigenous filmmakers and their stories.
I think we're at a really intriguing crossroads with Indigenous filmmaking. It has been set up for a long time. We've had a lot of really incredible people making media within the Indigenous world for so long without getting support that should have been there from other sources. So many of us have been raised in media in a way that we have not had access to because we have not had running water. We have not had electricity in our homes up until more recently. So many of us are media literate more media literate than we've ever been in generations. In 2016, Standing Rock reminded a lot of people that we are still here. Knowing that Standing Rock reminded them we are still here, we are still standing here, and then having this call for media happen at the same time is this beautiful moment where I think we're going to see so much more Native media, and I hope that the audience and the viewer and the consumer of media is also going to continue to call out for Native media, because there's so much of it out there and there's going to be so much more.
For the Indigenous Youth Media Program, I'm Daniel Cedillo.
Indigenous people telling Indigenous stories has been a theme of our workshop so far, and one photographer is an example of just that. Amy Lee has more.
Stephen TOYA works as a photographer for Northern Arizona University and has been working with us this week documenting the work we do. Stephen TOYA, a Navajo photographer with Northern Arizona University Marketing Department, expresses his appreciation of Indigenous people through his photography. TOYA states that his work makes him feel closer to the Indigenous community.
I like photography a lot. Being is I get to interact with different folks and I get to attend various events and take good portraits of people that I get to meet.
TOYA shares that his early years photography was not only his voice, but the voice of other Indigenous people.
I think what got me into photography was sort of like the look of the camera. When I was younger, we had an old film camera that I wasn't really able to use because it was pretty expensive, but I just liked the design. But it wasn't until I got into college, we had access to photo equipment and access to a darkroom. That's when it kind of took off.
TOYA's photography reaffirms that Native Americans are from this land and their representation matters.
A while ago, I photographed a powwow. Seeing it happen at NAU, Native Americans can take up space in higher education. So I definitely do like to attend those events.
TOYA documents the significance of Indigenous academics, their research, and events.
Even coming to college, I felt like Native Americans were sort of underrepresented. And they do cool things. Like they do like cool research, cool presentations, and I definitely felt like I had a purpose to be there, to make connections with folks and to take good photos. I felt like documentation of the event was the purpose that I was there. So because like if I'm not there taking photos, how can we show the community at large that events have taken place?
It's crucial that Indigenous youth pursue careers in media because it allows them to represent themselves adequately from their community's perspective.
I think it is important for Indigenous youth to have careers in media because it helps tell their stories from their perspective and from their communities. Because if it's not them telling the stories, it's an outsider telling the story for them. So when I hear that students want to learn photography or want to be journalists, and it's just like, yes, that's really cool because you want to be out there spreading the news, like learning, experiencing things. And through videography and through photography, you do experience a lot and you get a lot of perspectives. And you definitely grow as a person when you're like in journalism and in media.
Stephen TOYA has developed his voice through his photos and will continue to inspire future Indigenous media makers like us.
Radio is a media format that is completely accessible to all walks of life. It does not discriminate against income and is now more prevalent now than ever. Here is James Arnold with the story.
Due to the lack of internet access on Native reservations, radio waves have become a primary form of media to broadcast Indigenous Youth Nation.
Indigenous Youth Nation Show is a radio show designed to preserve and spread the culture to the youth by way of radio. Not everyone has access to the internet on a reservation, so radio is the next accessible thing.
My name is Daitia Benali. I got into the radio show because one of the people who started it is my mom, Janita Benali, and she told me that she was starting up this thing and I was interested in it. I feel like it's given me a new insight about how to perceive the world. I think the main idea that it's trying to spread is to keep your own culture alive and to continue learning about the different cultures around the world because it's good to get a perspective from everyone's point of view. The radio show gets their content by choosing a specific tribe to focus on and going to different places, like learning about artists from that tribe who have written books, music, made films, and also pieces of music, like recordings of people singing in their native language.
Greg McVicar is a longtime radio producer. He started off producing college media, then got into commercial radio, then finally got into public radio, where he later met Janita Benali.
Janita Benali and the Benali family have become our friends over the years through their music because we were doing a music show. She just called me up one day and said, hey, I have this idea for a radio show. What do you think? And As she described it, I was writing it down like, wow, this is like a grant application. It's so well thought out. And I got really excited about it and said, yeah, count me in. Let's do this. With Indigenous Youth Nation, also with my show, it's like, hey, Native people are here right now, all around you. And we're doing all kinds of stuff, making art, making music, making films.
Bajani show is Janita's niece. She has done segments on the Indigenous Youth Nation radio show before.
It was very fun. It was definitely a unique experience going and talking to older people who are more experienced in radio. I think we both learned from each other. I learned how to edit audio pretty well, and then they also learned about my culture. I learned like modern day stories, like with the book portion, and then the music part as well. I learned about a new musical artist. The main message of Indigenous Youth Nation was to unite different Indigenous communities through youths and through different stories. I got to meet new people, made new friends.
Working with other people like the ones we're interviewing, making the radio show about, it's really interesting and exciting. I think that we as the youth are learning a lot about what it is to be in a community, to be a part of your culture and be able to tell other people about who you are.
From the Indigenous Youth Workshop 2023, this is James Arnold.
Are you a Native community located on the Colorado Plateau? If so, there may be funding available to you. MACKENZIE Luna has more.
There is a lack funding available to Indigenous communities where the Colorado Plateau Foundation comes into play is to correct that disparity.
Can you imagine riding in the bed of a pickup truck? Well, for a lot of folks on the Navajo Nation, this is a common thing when hauling water. The Colorado Plateau Foundation bridges the gap between small communities and larger businesses through philanthropy. Rebecca Chatton works with the foundation to support Native communities.
We are a Native-led nonprofit. We work on getting grants out the door to Native-led organizations in the Colorado Plateau.
Providing funding is important, and according to Rebecca,
it's better to fund at the source and at the community level because they're closest to the problem and they understand it the most, and they will be able to come up with solutions that work for that specific area.
to be able to receive these funds, a Native-led organization can apply to be a grantee.
Any nonprofit that works within our four issue areas, being the protection of water, protection of sacred places, preservation of languages, community-based agriculture, and they're one of the tribes that fall within the Colorado Plateau. Those are the basic requirements for our grants.
Based in Flagstaff, Arizona, Native Americans for Community Action focuses on primary care, behavioral health, and mental health. As a grantee, they use the funds to create things like a community garden.
We also took those funds and we built an outdoor oven at the Museum of Northern Arizona. And we used that to make outdoor bread events and cultivate our crops into full meals using that oven.
As the Colorado Plateau Foundation is coming up on their 10-year anniversary, this is exactly what they work for.
Native organizations, especially rural Native organizations. The problem with that is being able to bring more awareness to that issue and being able to guide bigger organizations to give funding to Native-led organizations that focus on rural problems.
Whether it's providing a small garden or supporting a school, the Colorado Plateau Foundation helps uplift Native communities.
Build Native nations and build their capacity to be able to come up with their own solutions, because we, like I said, we are the people that are closest to the problem, so we will be the closest to the answers.
More information can be found on their website at coloradoplateaufoundation.org. This is
MACKENZIE,
AISLYNN,
and Bahajoni reporting.
Thank you for tuning into our special broadcast. We would like to thank our production leads, mentors, instructors, and sponsors.
Be sure to follow the Indigenous Youth Media Workshop on social media. Thank you.